Welcome to another Pint with Seaniebee, coming to you from my hometown of Dublin. I'm in the north side in Phibsborough, and I have a very interesting conversation about to happen, I hope, all about sustainability, diversity, the role of businesses in the community, transparency, and I hope whither capitalism. My guest is Tomas Sercovich. He is the CEO of Business in the Community, which is a company or organization I just heard about recently, and I'm intrigued to find out more about what it does and its goals and aims. So welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Not at all. You come from Argentina.
I do indeed, far, far away.
What part? Buenos Aires?
No, from a city called Córdoba, which is in the middle of the country.
It's Mendoza, yes. Near Mendoza?
Exactly.
Yeah, I've been there. I've been to the wine, and I went to Ushuaia.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah.
Which was actually, from a business in the community point of view, when I went to Ushuaia, have you been to Ushuaia?
Yeah.
So I remember the Argentine government back in the day, they decided they were going to make televisions and everything down there. And there's just these huge factories of it didn't really work. It just sort of destroyed the beauty of the place a bit.
Yes. It was ridiculous in that they wanted to generate employment in a very unpopulated area.
Yes.
So that was the idea. And there's a lot of tax incentives for companies who manufacture there. Yeah. But because there's nothing, all the components were coming from all over the world. Yeah. So imagine the environmental impact, blah, blah, blah. And then assembled there. And if your TV was assembled in Patagonia, in Ushuaia, then you can take it out tax-free with some sort of special incentives.
It didn't work, right?
Unfortunately, no.
The other thing I love about for listeners who don't know where Ushuaia is, it's the most southerly city in the world. It's right at the bottom of Argentina and Chile near Tierra del Fuego. And one of the things I loved about it is that shipping route under South America was one of the most treacherous seas. Yeah. Master and Commander, Cape Horn, Master and Commander being a great example. Yeah. And then there's an actual little channel, the Beagle Channel, that cuts right across and avoids you having to do it. And it took them.
And almost took us to war with Chile several times.
Yes,
so
I know.
It's contentious, but it's absolutely beautiful. I think that's one of the best ways of describing my home country.
Beautiful.
It's beautiful, but it's just complicated part of the world, I guess.
So what was it like growing up there? Because you look similar vintage. I'm late 40s and you're not maybe younger than me, but what was it like growing up there?
It was really nice. So what I like about Argentina is that nobody is from Argentina. Right. So it's a bit like the States. So my father's family are Eastern European Jews.
Okay.
That had emigrated 120 years ago. Another part of his family were London Jews. My mother's family were Italian, and they emigrated after World War II. It was really nice growing up with all this mixture of stories, of anecdotes, of your Italian granny telling you about food and traditions, and your father's father, my grandfather, insisting on some of the sort of the Jewish rites and celebrations. So that was really nice.
And there's the famous Welsh contingent as well, which is what brought you the rugby.
Yeah, Welsh and Irish as well. So actually my partner is Irish, and his family come from the West, originally from County Galway, but then they're based in Mayo. The most prominent figures in the development of the Argentinian education system was an Irish priest, Father Anthony Fahy.
Okay.
And when you go in Buenos Aires, you probably went to see this famous cemetery, where Eva Perón is buried, etc. On the main avenue or the main street in the cemetery, there's two Irishmen buried with massive statues. One is Father Fahy, and the other one is an Almirant William Brown, who was from Mayo, and he was the founder of the Argentinian Navy.
Okay. So I read about him before.
There's an amazing connection of stories, and then you would go to another part of the country, and there's a big Swiss and German immigration, and same in the north. We had from Lebanon and Syria. So actually we had a president of Argentina whose parents were born in Syria. So it was very nice.
So the things when I was growing up were, the two big things for a Dublin boy growing up were 1978 World Cup win, Mario Kempes and all those boys. quickly followed by the Falklands War, which had a huge impact here, Las Malvinas. I think the Irish were kind of on your side a bit in that. But what was it like for you during that time? Or was it?
Well, I was a bit small, to be honest with you. So I was born in 78.
Oh, you're 10 years younger. I'm sorry about that.
Don't worry.
I just still think I'm younger than I am. That's the problem here.
and that I look old, so that's fine.
I feel really bad.
No, don't.
So you were a World Cup baby nearly.
Yeah, exactly. and obviously I can't remember the Malvinas War, but
that was two.
The military government left a lot of scars, and it left a very divided society. So that's and that's still visible today.
Yeah, it's the economy that just keeps. I mean, we talk about Ireland having a turbulent economy, but it's Argentina is kind of the.
Yeah. My father would tell me that through his life he has seen like 4 or 5 crises of the size of the Irish one. Yeah. So it's fascinating because it's a country that has amazing talent and
education is good.
Education is amazing. You have amazing scientists, business people. You see Argentinians all over the world that are doing really well, but a terribly bad political system and an economy that doesn't take off.
It must be a cakewalk working here because we have a lot of similar issues here going back. Yeah. And so were you good at school? Were you always a smart person?
School? No, I think I was average.
Right.
Nothing. You know, I just think normal
life.
Nothing that I could highlight. And then secondary, interesting. I was 3 years in a state-owned sort of school. And then my family moved to Chile. So
what was your father working at?
So he was working in a family business.
Okay.
They were providing construction materials, so mainly wood. That business was wound down and closed, probably because of some economic crisis or another, I can't remember. And then we just decided to try luck again.
So what age did you go to Santiago?
Yes, and I was 15. And Santiago was also very interesting because it was in a transition. It was their second democratically elected president after a lot of Pinochet and dictatorship. And then I had my moment of rebellion, so I said I want to go back to Argentina to do university.
Yeah. Argentina it's got a really great vibe about it.
It has, but I think we're such complicated human beings because we are all these immigrants who feel very European, and you will talk to people in Argentina will tell you, no, I'm Swiss or I'm Irish, and they can't speak English and they've never left the country, but they would genuinely tell you, I'm European, and so it's a country that never made friends with anybody in the region, so it doesn't get along. I mean, it gets along normally okay, but it's not that bond or relationship with other countries. And I think we're very conflicted people. I don't know if you know that Buenos Aires is the city that after New York has the most number of psychologists.
I did read that somewhere.
Per capita. That tells you a lot about who we are.
Everyone's trying to find out who they are.
Exactly, and then there's an interesting side of it because people will be very open and tell you, I have to go to my psychologist, and it's a part of your life.
Yeah, I think the whole world is going that way now.
Yeah.
So what did you finish? Nice. What did you study in school?
So I studied international relations. I wanted to be a diplomat, but then I did an internship with a government office, and I didn't like it. I didn't feel very connected to the type of work, and I said, okay, what am I going to do? I have no idea. So I finished my studies. Then I tried to get a job. Impossible. At that time, Argentina was the type of country where, unless you had an IT or legal or accounting, there was no interest for other profiles. Yeah. So I got a scholarship to go to Italy. To Bologna.
Okay, been there.
And I did a master's there. It was also in international relations, but it was more oriented towards international management, so how big multinationals are managed, etc. And that's when it all started.
Was it from there, from Bologna, you came to Dublin?
Yeah.
What made you come to Dublin?
So one of my teachers in Argentina talked about a concept which is very unfortunate to all the Dutch listeners in your audience, because it's called the double standard or the Dutch standard. And that basically, it's a very old economic theory, very conservative one, that says that if you're a multinational and in your head office you comply with certain laws and regulations and behaviors, when you move to a country that the law, the regulation is of lower level, you should adapt to that lower level of compliance, because otherwise you would be losing competitiveness. Because if you're very rigid and you respect working hours, minimum wage, human rights, in a country where nobody else does, you're losing. Yeah, I mean,
it's a dangerous path to travel.
Very old, absolutely. But anyway, that then made me connect with the economic crisis in Argentina, where part of the big mistake that everybody did, government mainly, but it had been also with financial institutions, where they were part of international groups, English, Italian, you name it, Spanish. And when the crisis started, they sort of made a big, clear separation between their businesses in Argentina and the head office. And you could say that their behavior hadn't been very ethical or very responsible. And that's when somebody said to me, well, maybe you should, if you're interested in that, look at corporate responsibility. And I said, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
And that's when we started investigating, and I started throwing my CV everywhere, sending it to different countries and organizations, and that's when I got connected to...
So this is early 2000s?
It was 2002.
Okay. So let's go into maybe jump forward to where you are now. You're CEO of this company called Business in the Community.
Yeah.
Just briefly explain some of the examples of projects that you do and what your role is.
Of course. Business in the Community is an amazing organization, and I have to be biased there and say it because it was set up in 2000 alongside with our sister organization, which is called the Community Foundation for Ireland, and we can come back to that. It's amazing. They also do great work on philanthropy and corporate giving, which is amazing. Business in the Community was set up as an organization that would try and raise the standards of business around the concept of responsible businesses, are competitive businesses, are successful businesses. At a time where the understanding of what responsible business is was, okay, you pay your salaries and you pay your taxes, and that's how you contribute to the economy, and then you do a bit of charity giving or a bit of philanthropy, which is fine. And there used to be this expression at the time, it was called the chairman's wife's charities, because, back to the old, where obviously the chairman would have been a man, and he would have had a wife who would have every now and then send a check to the children's hospital or the opera or the...
Get the name on a hospital or something.
Exactly, on a wing of a university or something like that. And if there's something that I have learned to appreciate from this country is solidarity. And everywhere you go, there's this thing about sponsor somebody to go and do this and buy a chocolate, but it costs more because it goes to the other, and the table quiz. And it's so grassroots.
We do that, yeah.
And you do it really well.
I mean, just to pause there for a second, because I that was one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. We are very good at that, and I've often said that I don't think our government I think our government leans in too much on that. The best example, I guess, is homelessness, where the idea that homelessness is fixed by charity and not by government, who are funded by taxes. But this whole idea of leaning into the Irish people to just give more on top of the sort of taxes they pay is a sort of an issue that we don't really grumble about, but it's a real issue here. We are quite high on the league of donators in terms of global. I mean, how do you see that?
To me, it's two separate issues. The government has to be efficient and they have to do their job. You have to look at how you incentivize through giving, through tax breaks, through welfare. There's an amazing welfare state in this country, and it's enviable. And many other countries would like to have it. The question is how you make people transit out of welfare and into education and employment. And that's a lot of what we do here in Business in the Community. I think that then if on top of that you have a society that for a million reasons, and I probably can understand one or two because we're all very complex, and because of legacy of past or things that we lacked 150 years ago, have made us with a strong sense of community and generosity. I think that has to be enhanced and welcomed and promoted as much as possible.
Who funds Business in the Community?
So we are funded from two sources. So this is a membership organization. If you want to come here, you have to pay a fee.
Based on number of employees, turnover?
The majority of our members are quite large companies. And what they do is there's sort of three different levels of tiers. And depending on how much service or how much engagement they want to have with us, they would pay level 1 or 2. And then we have a top level, And not only have to pay more to be on that top level, but it's quite a smart business model, which I have nothing to do with it, I have to admit, but it's really smart. Not only you have to pay more, but you have to have passed, or you have to have obtained a standard on responsible business practice, which we created 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It's called Business Working Responsibly. What we do is we analyze your management systems. We look at your policies, your practices, how you measure the results of what you do across the board, how you treat your employees, how you treat your customers, do you recycle?
Does anyone ever fail that?
Well, we were asked that yesterday at a meeting because we were trying to get a company to sign up to it. And I said no, because the way it works is that this is not about trying to spot your mistakes or
tell you how to do better.
Exactly. So we accompany we go with the company through a process, we advise them, and then when they feel they're ready, we get out of the way and we bring a third party, because I cannot be advising you and then giving you the award.
Yes.
Right?
So I want to roll up the sleeves here a bit, because we have a Venn diagram that meets somewhere in the middle around this, because my background, as I said to you, is in strategy, planning and advertising.
Yeah.
I have some great stories, for example, going back to 1996, where one of my big clients in Ireland when I was working here was Nestle, and I worked on their chocolate business. And one day, the students of UCD decided to boycott all of the chocolate products, which is Kit Kat and Yorkie and Fruit Pastilles and all these brands, from the stores all around the campus, because Nestle's behavior on baby milk in Africa was abhorrent, incentivizing doctors to get mothers to use baby milk, and there was water issues and all this kind of stuff. And the chairman came in to me, and Paddy Martin, he said to me, "What do I do?" And I said, "Well, are you behaving like this in Africa?" And he went, and this is before the internet, right? There's no internet, there's no Twitter, there's no Facebook. And he was like, "Yeah, but it's not us here in Ireland." And I said, "Well, unfortunately, the way the world is going, it's still going to apply to you." The second example was in Australia, 1998, again, before CSR. I mean, CSR in advertising terms are putting something back, or even whitewashing consumers with your tales of great behavior. Started with the bad companies, the oil companies, the cigarette companies, who were guilty of the very products that they made. But then it starts drifting in, so we were in Australia working, and I did a pitch to one of the big insurance companies there, and I said, you should say that by 2020 we're going to remove, say, homelessness from Australia, because we believe as a house insurer that everyone deserves a house. And they looked at me as if I had 5 heads, and what are you talking about? We're not going to do that. That's the government's job. And so, as time is going by, this CSR, putting something back, responsibility has been growing and growing, because customers are demanding it, and because they can weed out through the internet behavior by companies that is contrary to maybe what they're saying or unethical. Tell me a little bit about that whole continuum as you've seen it to where it is today and from where it's come from.
It's very interesting what you're asking, because that's the real story.
Yeah.
And when I started, this was very much, as I was saying earlier, philanthropy and just give and that's all. So what I see is that companies realize that the behavior of their clients or their customers is changing. And that's when they start trying to get more sharp on this type of issues. Whether they see it as a business opportunity, so I'm all about the environment and recycling, and I don't want this and I don't want that, so therefore here you are, pay more. I remember when I came here, there was only one coffee shop in Dublin in 2002 where you could get fair trade coffee. Can't remember the name, it was in town, but you had to pay 20 cents extra. 7 or 8 years later, McDonald's Ireland announces that 100% of all the sugar, tea, coffee was certified fair trade.
Yeah.
So that to me is an amazing evolution. In some cases you do it because you think it's the right thing, fine. But I actually like when they tell me I do it because I'm going to win more customers. So I mean, you come from advertising, and I don't know what's your take on Dove and the campaign for real beauty, which in some countries was quite inspirational in terms of all that message, beauty is inside you, and changing the paradigms of the models that will portray the product. And I think it's very interesting to see where those activities are.
Well, it's a fantastic example to ask me, because I used to work on Olay. Which would be Dove's primary competitor with Procter & Gamble. The Dove brand does have a very deep DNA about showing normal women in the advertising. They've had that even in the 70s and 80s, and they sort of leaned into that, away from the sort of glitzy model, big name kind of stuff. And it polarized. First of all, Procter & Gamble, my client, said, oh, that doesn't work. We've tried it, which is a terrible thing for clients to say because you may not have tried it properly. Yeah. And they were extremely dismissive of it. Yeah. The issue as to how successful it was, you know, I often say that it doesn't really matter almost what you do with your advertising. I've never seen risky advertising like that damage a brand. Dove is still around; it's still a very big player, but the messages it was sending out to me were really important to young girls. Because I mean, advertising. One of the reasons I'm out of it is that I got disillusioned with the sort of ethical nature of the ad business, which is atrocious. It's one of the great businesses where people, you know, sleep like babies, but don't realize the fact that they're manipulating greed and they're telling lies and they're doing all these kind of things. So, you know, I won't be getting any more jobs in advertising for this, but I don't mind. But, you know, the Dove campaign, in terms of its bravery, in terms of it doing something that nobody else was doing, which is what I believe you have to do if you want to do proper advertising. You should not look like your competitor, like all car ads look the same. But more importantly, the idea that there was a sisterhood and that there was a pushback against beautification of teenage girls, having always to look your best. And I also had some women going, I don't know why they're doing that. They should be showing, I want to see what I could look like, not what I do look like. And so there was but with all of that tension that's going on there, that's a great example of advertising that works. Absolutely. Because even if you don't like it, you still are thinking and talking about it, and it's getting great traction on social media and all that kind of stuff, which really built it. Yeah. So it is a good example. You then start pulling back another layer and go, okay, now we're talking about Unilever. Yeah. Who own Dove, okay? Yeah. Now let's go and have a look at a few of the other Unilever products. That behavior is not cross Unilever. And that's where I get a little bit sort of skeptical, okay? So they've manipulated an idea. But, you know, you go into some of their other products and it's just like they're just reinforcing stereotypes and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So, yes, a nice win, but was it done for honest purposes or was it done as a gimmick? And that's where I was sort of finish on that.
You're asking a good question, but just on Unilever, Unilever also bought a brand called Ben & Jerry's. Yeah. And they do amazing work as well. Yeah. But they're one of the paradigms that we look at in corporate responsibility, actually. They have this thing called the Sustainable Living Plan. Yeah. And it's actually a very transparent way of demonstrating how they have a strategy across the business, how they are improving on it. And again, obviously this advertising and the public face of these companies, it's really fascinating, and there's some amazing examples there as well. But I also think that what's on the back. So how are you doing to improve on the packaging? Or how are you doing to improve on the welfare of the people that collect the Lion's tea, which is also owned by Unilever and all the other products? I think that's what it really happens.
Yeah, no, I mean Unilever and P&G have got big departments that look after this part of their business because it is critical. You know, they are being very socially aware and socially conscious. It's just,
let's talk about alcohol. You know, the whole conversation there is, and I have seen quite a lot of change in this country. Yeah. And I remember talking to companies like Diageo when before the whole drink aware campaign started. First ever clips that were showing don't see a great night wasted, which was in my view a very great line, a very nice campaign. It was very simple and it was very real, and it was probably a bit different from all the ones that you see, the car crashing and all which was the consequences. This was like nothing happened, but you end up looking like a total silly with the girl you wanted to connect with that night, and it didn't happen.
Again, you've picked two very good examples to talk about. I mean, I'm a big drinker, and I drink a lot of Diageo and other products, and we have a problem in this country. We are one of the biggest binge drinker countries in Europe. We have alcoholism running thick through our veins, going back 300-400 years. One of the reasons Guinness was actually invented was the Archbishop asked if they could invent a thicker, more substantial drink that was less alcoholic, so men were not just drinking whiskey and beating their wives up when they went home or whatever. So we have this. We also have an extremely powerful drink lobbyist that going on here, which is fighting for every single win that it can. The fact that they do drink aware and that they advertise to drink sensibly, again, is a bit cigarette-y to me. It's like they wouldn't do it, but they feel they better so that they can keep their advertising. The advertising is looking like it's going to get completely more and more restricted. They're pulling them out of sports sponsorships. And again, to be fair to Guinness and a lot of these brands, they have put so much money into things like the GAA here and other sports that, what happens when that sponsorship goes, and is that sponsorship fair, and should you be showing sports people and people drinking? I don't know. So I've worked on a lot of alcohol products, and it's very difficult tightrope to walk. I'd hate to be that lady who heads up their lobbying. And there's jobs and there's pubs and there's the social fabric of society here based around having a pint. So that's it. So let's just take that as an example. I know Diageo are one of your clients. Where does what would I say? Members, one of your members. Exactly. Not clients. Clients sounds a bit grubby. So where does that landscape of, say, booze fall in your kind of when you look at that in terms of business in the community? Maybe we can use some examples, or what do you? Yeah.
So back to this assessment that we do that leads to this certification. What we try and do there is make them understand what is the connection between what you do with your employees and what you do with your local community, and how that goes back to your business. The case of Diageo is interesting because they're a multinational, so obviously they have massive teams of people working on this because they're acutely aware of the situation. Where we would have helped them was to really think about how they can make an impact in their community.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because nothing is black and white, isn't it? It's not like the beer. You have all these things about the companies, but then you say, if we go to Dublin 8 and you say Guinness, the awe of respect and the housing and the first medical facility and the brand, it plays a significant role. So what impact they could work there.
The Diageo thing, and I'm not picking on these brands, but in any market, the big players are the ones that you just use for example purposes. And again, talking about what you just said about them, I worked as the head of strategy for Guinness in Asia, 2003, 4, 5, 6 sort of time. So right at the height of the boom here. Diageo, one of their biggest strategies back then was they were going to shut down James's Gate Brewery and move it to Park Royal over in London, okay? Quite apart from the stupidity of doing that for a brand that is anchored in Dublin, right? Like the brand DNA. Well, we know the actual, it's from Ireland. It is the Ireland thing. They were going to make it in Britain. Oh, last place you should do it. Because the property was so expensive, and they realized that they were sitting on close to $1 trillion worth of properties. And they were just going to keep the storehouse open, have a small still. Now, the only reason that didn't happen was because as far as I know, and apologies Diageo if I've got all this wrong, but I think that I've got it right, was that the bust hit. And suddenly their property was not worth as much. And we said, we changed our mind, we're keeping it. Now, the damage to the community that them moving out would have caused Dublin would have been huge. And not just from a employment situation or whatever, just from a kind of it's just a kick to the stomach. Do they just use you as thanks very much, and then they go off and make their own sort of minds, or do you feel like you have power?
Sometimes
depends on
we
the
do,
company.
and sometimes we don't. Yeah. I mean, and I can tell you, there's companies we are knocking at the door and saying you should be doing this and this and this, and they never do it. We have success in some areas, and in others we don't. But I don't want to necessarily talk about Diageo, but I remember when Coca-Cola, they had the bottling plant. It was in Dublin 12, I can't remember where, and there was a process to move it out to Northern Ireland because they had set up one of the most mechanized bottling plants in the world, etc. I think those processes are also a reality in business, and the bottom line is that if I'm a Diageo investor or a Coca-Cola investor, I need a certain return, and what we are arguing is that you should be able to get that return by doing the right thing. And maybe it's not a question of whether Diageo will stay forever in the Dublin 8 area, but if you were to exit, how do you do it in a responsible way? So we would speak with some of our members, for instance, on, if you're going to exit a community, how do you do it responsibly? And there is a process, and maybe you can set up a fund, a legacy fund, and that can generate support for the community over a number of years. The reputational part, I'm not a big expert on that, and I'm sure they would have had their discussions.
That's funny.
But I think we
would have had chats with them about that.
But I think it's an interesting way of looking at how this whole process can be managed. So at the end of the day, if people were let go during the crisis, and I know that some companies were letting go people by text message, and others were having a more developed process, whereas they were having conversations and helping them with their outplacement and trying to look at different alternatives to firing people. So maybe we would all work 1 month less a year and we sort it out. But back to your question, because I don't want to avoid it. The successes are somewhere and at some point. So maybe we are very successful on the communication part. So we advise them on how to better articulate what they're doing, because it's quite complex, this whole thing. Yeah. And there's a lot of cynicism. If there's something that Irish and Argentinian we have a lot of, is cynicism. So
I know I wrote down here lip service.
Exactly, and greenwashing and all of that. So of course, there is that.
But do you feel like you have integrity as a company? I'm going to go off the naming names, but supposing company X you go into and you know that they're not, that they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing, and you've, I guess, written a memo to them about it, but like they have no compunction to follow what your advice is. But at what point do you go, well, you're now no longer a member of Business in the Community because you're behaving this way?
Yeah, well, that's the $1 million question.
Has it ever happened?
No. Okay. And the reason why is that we don't consider we're here the one to judge on who's right or who's wrong. Okay. So if you want to be a member, you have to comply with the law, be responsible to the basics, the minimum.
Yeah.
And we would demand you to do so. And then we believe that it's better that you're with us and that we try and work with you over time, because these things are not easy. Also, there is a question, okay, let's go back to banks, and you could have said, well, they're all terrible and let's destroy them. Okay, but then what do you do the day after? How do you start working again? How do you rebuild trust? And part of that process is by engaging in this responsible business. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's about engaging on that responsible business agenda. So that's where we don't feel we should say, well, your company is not good because. But
then who does whistleblow? I mean, there is nobody. The banks is a good example. Stuff gets uncovered that's been rife, not just across one bank, but many in a cartel situation. And there's no one going, hey, and there's no one even going to jail or court, hardly anyone for it. This is the sort of not the toothlessness, but the fact that you're agreeable and you're approachable, and the organization has got members that believe and say they want to. But there's no one really policing this. I mean, another good example, which I'm sure is maybe coming onto your agenda, is the whole AI thing, and where artificial intelligence is going to go versus communities and how it affects people, how it affects us. We'll all be working for robot masters in the future, But that's creeping, Things happen creeping, and then suddenly, an oil tanker blows up off the coast of somewhere and pollutes everything, and BP are in trouble, or Shell are in trouble. Because I, have my advertising man's guilt that I want to put something back. But you get a lot of frustration, for example.
Of course you get it sometimes. Just one thing, obviously, if you're breaking the law, you're breaking the law. And there's nothing
But that doesn't matter half the time,
No, come on.
Well, no, you know what I mean. I mean, it's like, yes, I got it. But there's lots of companies that are breaking the law or not following the spirit of the law, which applies to taxation and everything. But I got you. You have to.
I mean, so obviously that's one thing. Then there's a space. You can say to yourself, I never felt that I was being used, if you want to put it that bluntly, or that somebody was using their membership of Business in the Community to cover up for whatever. And let's say BP, if they had been a member of Business in the Community here, what was behind that? It was an accident. Then you can talk about, the proper processes weren't in place, the health and safety policy, blah, 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 they hadn't properly trained, it was poorly communicated. All of that can be improved on. So would you say you're a horrible polluter and get out and I don't want to see you ever again?
No.
Or can I help you, or can we work on improving on this and this and this?
Yeah.
And if you're going to do something, because obviously they did a lot of investment in local communities in the Gulf of Mexico, are you just going to do it splattering money all over? Are you going to have a strategic thing? Do you want somebody to tell you what are the key problems in that local communities? So is it education or employment or empowerment or diversity? And then maybe that's where I think I could say, I think I played a pretty interesting role, because this could have, the recovery would have been much worse if they had not worked with us.
No, I like your idea that it's better to be in the room. It's what you're saying. It's better to be a voice in the room than a voice. Because if you're not in the room, they're going to probably behave 10 times worse. You know what I mean? Some of these companies might.
Exactly.
Have to be careful. That's what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to talk about is from the other side of the fence, right? So you have all these businesses here, and then you also, in your title, have community. Okay?
Yeah.
So one of the things, just to ramble for a bit, I've been home for a year, just to set some context. My view, coming back to my hometown after 21, 22 years away, is, and I've said this on a podcast before, that the 5 things that were a problem in 96 when I left are the same 5 things that are a problem today. Now, if you took 21 years off 1996, you'd be back in the 70s. They probably wouldn't be the same 5 things. So what is, the 5 things I feel are that, we have an education system in drastic need of reform. We have a health system that's creaking at the seams. We have a homeless situation that's embarrassing, quite frankly, I think. And we have growing inequality, and we have, I think, a government that doesn't use creativity or action and procrastinates. With Leo Varadkar and this new team that are in place now, it's for the first time I've kind of felt they're young, and they look like they're incorruptible, and they look like they're not taking backhanders, and they look like they're being fair. I mean, maybe some of them are, but we still are moving away from this old man politics that made Ireland what it was, and it was awful, growing up during the Haughey regime. So I say we have this thing called the community. We have this thing called citizenship, being a citizen. You said at the top of the podcast how you see Ireland as being a great bunch of citizens who can rally around solidarity, etc. Let's just take the inequality point, and you also represent capitalism. I read one of your quotes in one of the interviews on your website where you said, "No business can succeed in a failing society," which I think is a very interesting quote. And then the issue is, to what extent can business prevent societies from failing? How do you see the Irish scorecard in that context?
Yeah, well, that's a very good way of putting it around. The question we have to ask ourselves, my view, is what can business do about those issues? And what is the role of government, and what's the role of business? To me, that's the first question. That's when you can start seeing, 20 years ago, did we have companies that were going out to empower local communities through employment, through education, which is some of the work we do here. Actually, here we work with homeless people, we work with immigrants, we work with Syrian refugees. We go to over 100 schools that are designated DESH, so that they have a very high dropout rate. I believe in that. I believe in, and there's a very interesting case study of it was done over a 10-year period of what has been the impact of a program where we do paired reading. This is a pharmaceutical company up in Sligo, and what they do is that they go, I would say, I think it's once every fortnight, to a school, and you're a young student, and we read together, and we discuss about, well, did you understand what that was, and what was the character feeling, or where was it going, or what happened in the end. Because they've done it over a long period of time, they were able to track how the reading comprehension improved over years.
Okay.
Now, obviously, it's not the only reason.
Yes.
But it is a reason.
So are these just employees from the factory go in, and do they befriend one child, or?
They do it on groups.
Okay,
yeah.
groups.
We have 7 different education initiatives here in Business and Community, which is on a one-to-one. So, for instance, you mentor a senior cycle secondary school student.
Right.
So you meet 1 hour a month over 2 years. In many cases,
it should be easy.
It's of course, yeah, and that's the beauty.
Yeah.
And but we have seen cases of young kids that would come and tell us that the only positive inspiration they had was that mentor that they met once a month over that period, and that made them at least finish their studies and go into something.
Well, it's what a Pint with Seaniebee is trying to do. It's really spotting this idea that there's so many kids out there who don't know what they want to do and are being pushed to do things that they're not even sure, mainly by their parents. And having someone with experience to be a mentor is fantastic.
It's powerful. And just let me just
Sorry,
that part, because I think
you.
it's very interesting.
Going.
No. Some of our mentors from our companies were mentees themselves.
Great.
So they developed such a great relationship that then they studied and they kept in contact with the company or with the mentor, and then they applied and then they got the job. So it's really nice to see that. That's the part that I think it's powerful.
Yeah.
Should business replace the role of government in the health system? No. But we have a health crisis in the world, not only just in this country. And that's what sometimes
we forget.
I don't know what's your view, but traveling helps you look at different realities. Half of the world is overweight and the other half is malnourished. And for the first time 2 years ago, there were more overweight, obese than malnourished.
Yeah.
If I'm a bank, is that my problem? Probably not. But it is a problem if more and more your employees are calling in sick because they have more diabetes and they're feeling more unhealthy. So maybe if you start with well-being and feeling better, and you know that stress is the major cause of employee absenteeism in Europe. So if you start working around those issues, and whether you're being harassed by your phone or your boss at 10 o'clock at night on a Friday, that to me is the power of business in impacting on health. Can enter into the whole issue of nutrition, information, transparency. At the moment there's a piece of European legislation. It obliges large companies to disclose on their social and environmental information, on gender and other diversity factors within their whole workforce, but specifically the board of directors and the senior management team. When the European Commission explains the reason why, is because they felt that part of the very bad decisions made in many large companies that led to the economic crisis was because of this group behavior. So I mean, I remember a few years ago when the crisis started, there was a 2-page spread in one of the Irish newspapers, and you could see 100 persons were probably the directors of most companies, you know, because I'm your chairman and you're my treasurer, and you know, it's like, so what would you see there? They were all white men over 60 years of age who went to probably 3 or 4 schools and 1 or 2 business schools and universities. That's why they understand that diversity is really important for this.
There's a great little segue, and that was Michael Moore's movie Where Do We Invade Next? had a great piece about Iceland, when Iceland went down, and there was one bank that survived, and it was run by women, and their quote was, "We don't invest in anything we don't understand." And that was the only one that survived, you know. And I mean, I'm a great believer in, you know, the ad business is appalling in terms of its diversity, first probably more so, and also its refusal to appoint women to more senior positions. So like at no point, I don't want to sound like I'm not being supportive, because I think if anything the world needs more of your type of organization. I want to try and, before we finish, move into sort of a more macro view of your view of the world and where we might be going. But one of the things I want to talk about, which was an idea I had personally about 20 years ago, was this thing called PCAP. It was Poverty Eradication in Africa Through Capitalism. Now, I wanted to talk about your views on capitalism, and it's getting a lot of bagging, in my view, from a lot of people who don't really know what they're talking about. And also from the people who defend it. They kind of go, well, what do you want, Marxism instead? And it's clearly not that, but that's what they retaliate with. And then before you know it, if everyone gave all the food to everyone, we'd all be sitting here with a bowl of rice. I mean, really stupid kind of arguments. I'm more interested in what you're trying to do and what companies as capitalism could be doing better. A good example would be Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden. For some reason, everyone's ignoring them. They do pay extremely high taxes, but the people there get basic human rights kind of looked after. The prison system's a lot better. There's a lot of things going on up there. And, you know, I've been to Norway last year. They've got major problems with heroin and lots of other issues that they have to deal with. But this idea of capital, the poverty eradication in Africa idea was if every company gave what it did, right? So it's not unlike your thing, but if an ad agency gave 20 creative people and they came up with 100 ideas that cost less than $1 to make that would change the lives of Africans, right? And again, Africans hate being labelled Africans because each country has its own problems. So
Absolutely.
Please go with me on that. And we would go into one country and fix their issues. And then that would be their stamp of PCAP. And then another company that is a plastics or wood manufacturer would make this thing, and that's their stamp. And then a transport company would come in and say, well, we'll move it there. So at no point is there money. It's just companies, capitalist companies, doing what they do to affect and make something that's like this biro that will really help doctors in Mali or whatever, right? Of course, General Electric thought it was a great idea, and a few companies went great, but of course they went, how the hell do you get this organized? It's impossible. But what I'm trying to just tease out of you is the idea that, in my view, we need a new ism that's not unlike capitalism, but that's much more accountable. And we talked earlier in the podcast about shareholders. Paul Polman, just to give Unilever big ups, because we weren't really picking on you earlier. Paul Polman came out a year and a half ago and said he's not doing quarterly reviews for the financial markets because he said you're either with us for the long haul or you're not.
Yes.
And he can't move if every time there's a dip in profits of 1% that all the shareholders get into a tizzy. And I love that idea, for example. So maybe you only have to talk to the business community once a year.
Yeah.
I'm talking too long, but give me comments on your framework of where the world might be going from a capitalism point of view.
That phrase that you were mentioning earlier, I actually stole it, I have to confess. the one that businesses cannot prosper in societies that fail. And that to me is the essence. And it's about how we move towards models of more inclusive and sustainable economies. Yeah. So by sustainable, I mean the environmental part. There's going to be 9 billion of us very soon. And we all need to live within the boundaries of nature, and clearly we're already causing enough destruction, and we see the consequences. Now you name storms in this country, which we didn't used to, but that's
quite right.
Fancy thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we need to maintain the environment and to try and limit the terrible damage we're causing, and we need to be inclusive. Yeah. And that is where I see, again, that business can play a big role. So, for instance, you were talking about Africa. There's a lot of business ideas that come from Africa, but we don't know they come from Africa. Right. So, money transfer using mobile phones was invented in Kenya. A product that's called M-Pesa. M-Pesa means money in Swahili. And somebody had the idea, because obviously the levels of people with bank accounts is super low there, but they needed money because they have a relative in Europe that wanted to send them money, or because they wanted to exchange things. They invented that concept, and now in the modern world, or in the industrialized world, we also do those things, and that also came from there. Yunus, which is the father of microcredit, Muhammad Yunus in Bangladesh, he set up that whole concept, but he also set up the basis for this whole notion of the business at the bottom of the pyramid, which is the idea that you can do business, and very interesting business initiatives were set up there. So that's the type of capitalism I believe in.
Okay.
I probably wouldn't, I couldn't care less about the label. It's whatever you call it. But I think there is a role there. And I see, maybe I'm biased because I'm long-term looking at this. Even if it's once a year, Paul Polman has to convince. And there's a great story about when Kraft wanted to acquire a Unilever around a year ago, and a whole part, it was not the only reason, but one of the reasons why Unilever shareholders rejected the takeover was in relation to how Paul Polman argued the whole values and how the sustainability agenda had been mainstreamed in the company. And Kraft, it was Kraft Heinz.
I used to work on Kraft as well.
Didn't get that, wasn't at that level. So I'm not saying we're going to change overnight. Either, as I was saying, because you want to make money, or because you understand, again, that if tomorrow there's a massive floods and half of this country is gone, half of your business is gone, and of your employees and of that engagement. It's urgent, and I think we're going to recognize very soon that it's the only way of doing business.
Two more questions for you. One is just again, the 20 years I was away, come back to Ireland. We're a rock in the middle of the roughest sea and windiest sea in the world, and we have I just can't understand why we have not become a leader in sustainable energy. I just cannot understand. In fact, we're burning more oil, I think, than we should be. Do you start? I know that's out of your bailiwick, but it's interesting for you being from Argentina. Do you feel positive about where it's going, the world in general, or do you feel negative?
No, I feel positive. We have to. We must. You were talking earlier about artificial intelligence, and there's a whole thing that scares us a lot about it. But I think there's also amazing opportunities. And if you think about how in the future, maybe we'll be able to work half of the hours that we work and still be able to maintain, because Scandinavia, that's a social contract that the Scandinavians signed. And they give 70% of their income to the state, and they get the best education in the world is in Finland.
Yeah. And Norway's good as well.
Exactly.
Denmark.
So I think that we just need to grow up in a sense, and I think that is coming. And obviously we need to be very careful, we need to control and check, not take things for granted. Obviously there will be always somebody who try to make advantage, but I think they're being singled out more and more. I am optimistic, again, maybe because we're standing here in the middle of the rock, as you're saying, but we're in the middle of a very prosperous Europe. If there's one thing that scares me more than climate change is inequality. And the gap between rich and poor, between countries, is the part that I will be most concerned, that we're not able to generate enough prosperity around the world, and that we're living better and better, and at the expense of others living worse and worse. So I honestly believe that business can do.
Yeah, and I think
do much.
I think you're right.
And we just need to go and keep on saying and repeating and repeating and repeating, and that we will get there, and we'll then drag the politicians with us as well.
Hopefully.
And the final thing I would say also to this equation is investors. Let's not forget, because there's a lot of money there, and they have a massive power. We haven't discussed much around that in Ireland, but if you look at the biggest pension fund in the world, it's the Norwegian state fund, the oil fund.
Is it really?
It is. And their investment policies are very strict.
You mean ethically strict?
Yes. So when they stopped investing in companies that were heavily reliant on coal, that caused a massive impact across the industry. And when they stopped earlier than that, cluster munition companies, because obviously they need to get a lot of financial return, because there's a big, massive pensions to pay for all the Norwegians. Yeah. But with certain criteria. So again, we need to influence more the institutional investors and the high net worth individuals, because that's where we can make a big difference.
I agree with you. Last question. What would you say to the young Thomas who was getting on the plane from Santiago to go to Buenos Aires, if you could whisper in his ear?
I probably would tell him to maybe seize the opportunity every day and try and make a difference. I think I came probably late to this world of sustainability, or whatever you want to call it, because I think it's highly rewarding and it's very exciting, and at the end of the day it's about trying to change people's behaviors. We can all do it. You don't necessarily need a massive organization and a massive brand behind you. We can all do it, and I think that's what we should all be about.
I totally agree. Thanks very much for being on the Pint with Seaniebee.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to the next one.